So when I was about 21, many moons ago, I lived in Washington, D.C. I was a student at the American University. Um, and the summer of my third year, I believe, my junior year, I decided I wasn't going to go back and stay with my parents in South Carolina. I was a grown man now, and I was staying in Washington, D.C. year round where I now lived. I didn't go home to stay with my parents anymore. So, at the time, I had a number of jobs on campus. I was working in the library. I was working in the dormitory as well as an RA. So I was kind of in charge of a floor of the dorm. And that summer, the university offered RAs the chance to stay on and work through the summer because a few of the buildings, the newer ones, the nicer ones, were being turned into kind of conference centers. So people would be staying in them while attending seminars on campus. Um, so my job was basically to sit at the reception desk. It was like a hotel reception desk, and also to help with the changeover of the rooms and so forth, emptying the bins. And one morning I was sitting at the reception desk, and there was a conference going on for educators, professors, and school teachers. And one woman came down into the lobby in the morning, a teacher, I believe, and she sort of appeared over my shoulder at the side of the reception desk, and she sort of leaned over and she was looking at the book I was reading. And she said, "Oh, well, that's rather juvenile, isn't it?" And I said, "Well, it's no more juvenile than walking up to a complete stranger and insulting them for no reason," which is what I said in my head sometime later. But, it's not like it's stuck in my craw. This is only 25 years ago. Uh, so, what I want to say, though, is science fiction. I know a lot of people's perception of science fiction is juvenile. So, I suppose I can't entirely blame her for having that point of view. For a lot of people, you mention the word science fiction, and the first thing that they might think would be something like Star Wars. So they think spaceships, they think aliens, they think laser guns, pew pew pew, pew pew. That's science fiction to a lot of people. They see a man on screen in a rubber suit going, "Rrrr," and they think, is this seriously meant to be entertainment for adults? So for a lot of people, science fiction has a reputation of a genre that doesn't hold any appeal, um, that it's juvenile. But unfortunately, on-screen science fiction hasn't always been the best representation of what this genre is. It's not just about spaceships and technology, and it's not just about science. In some ways, the name of the genre is a misnomer. A lot of fans of science fiction use a different term altogether. A lot of people call it speculative fiction because that's what it is. It's speculating about what could happen. So instead of watching a science fiction film and thinking, I don't understand these people, I don't know what they're doing, I can't pronounce their names. The place they're living in I don't get it. What is this? And why are they doing that? I can't relate to it. What is this? Because ordinarily, if you're watching a drama, you're being confronted with questions about human relationships. You're being confronted with or questions about mental health, and those sorts of life choices. That's what most fiction challenges you to think about. Science fiction is a little bit different. It's asking different questions on arguably a bigger scale, big questions about the choices we have to make and the things we need to consider as a society, as a civilization, not just on an individual basis. So, for example, if you're in your 40s like I am, you might remember the days before email at work. And you will know what a change came over day-to-day working life with the introduction of email. When I first started working at a school, computers on the desk were still a new thing. This is Windows 3.1 days when I first started. So technology can have a pretty profound impact on our day-to-day life. It can have a pretty profound impact on the way we communicate with each other. how we relate to one another. And it's important for us to think about those things so that when these new things arrive, these new technologies and innovations and advances, it's not catching us completely off guard. We've had some time to think about it. We've had some time to wrestle with the potential consequences of what these changes may bring to us. That's part of what science fiction is there for. Science fiction on screen often doesn't ask big questions, but sometimes it does. I'll just give you some examples that you will have heard of. So, Blade Runner. Very famous film, Harrison Ford, directed by Ridley Scott. It's all about these artificial life forms that look indistinguishable from other people. And yet, because they are built by people, they do not have rights as people. So although they have imaginations, they dream when they sleep, and they get angry, have an emotional repertoire, emotional range, you can dispatch them. And the main character of the film, Harrison Ford, is a guy who goes around shooting them. And so the film poses these rather important questions about how we relate to artificial intelligence. And this resonates with me. I've been posting on Facebook over the last week about these little robots that are buzzing around Milton Keynes and have been for the last couple of years. And this really strange reaction I have to them. And I know I'm not the only one. That when I see these little guys, and they're just a little box on wheels with a kind of orange flag thing sticking out of the top. Sort of like WALL-E without his little head. I can't help but just want to pick them up and hug them. I have the same kind of reaction to them that I have when I see guide dogs. When I see a guide dog walking, or a visually impaired person walking with a guide dog, or someone with a helper dog, I just want to pick that dog up and squeeze it. I just love them so much. And I have the same kind of reaction when I see these little robots. Why? It's not because I'm a science fiction fan and I love the idea of robots. It's because these little guys are buzzing about completely by themselves. They're so small, and they look completely vulnerable. I mean, anyone could just pick one up, rip the top off, see what it's delivering inside, and steal it. They look so vulnerable, and they just chug along. Yesterday when I was leaving campus, one was coming along the path that intersected with the road I was coming out, and it saw me coming, and it stopped at the edge of the road, and it waited for me to drive by, and then I looked in my rearview mirror, and as soon as I'd gone by, right across the road, and I just this incredible emotional reaction. I thought, oh, you adorable thing. Why am I having those reactions? I think that's interesting. It is to me anyway. Why do we react to things that we know are not thinking and feeling? That's a fascinating question to me. And it's interesting in terms of thinking about where we're going as a civilization, because the introduction of artificial intelligence to our daily lives is proceeding. I mean, we have Siri on our phones, and we've got whoever the Google woman is in those, Alexa. So it's already started, although those are not artificial intelligence that have the capacity to think for themselves and dream and aspire. But the more human they get, the more recognizable they get. What is our relationship with it going to be like? We have weird stuff going on today about people having relationships with animatronic dummies. I mean, mostly that's in other parts of the world, I understand, but I think that's a portent of things to come, and it's important for us to think about that. What is going on in people's heads? And what are the consequences of that? We've got issues with people getting more and more isolated in modern life as they get more and more into their little screens. I say we. And so what are the potential consequences of this? Where are we going? What impact is that having on the way we form relationships and maintain them over time? All of these are really big, important questions. And they're questions that really only science fiction is equipped to deal with. Let me give you an example of a book that I love, a science fiction book. And I think that literature is the best medium for science fiction, because it is the medium in which you can really unpack these ideas and wrestle with them. I don't mean to make science fiction or speculative fiction sound like an academic genre. It's not like reading a textbook or a manual. There are narratives, there are characters, and hopefully, if it's well written, it will propel you forward. It will be gripping. But while it's being gripping and exciting and interesting, should be thought-provoking as well. It should be giving us an opportunity to wrestle with some of the questions that we may have to face. And it's better that we have a chance to think about them ahead of time and consider what the consequences could be before having to make that decision or make those choices. So it's a genre that serves humanity like no other in a unique way. So the book I was going to give you as an example is a book called The Light of Other Days. This is a book I recommended to my dad, and he read, and I know he liked it. It's one of my favorites. It was written by co-authors jointly, Arthur C. Clarke and Stephen Baxter, both science fiction writers with a reputation for having heads for science, very scientifically literate. Arthur C. Clarke is credited with coming up with the idea for the geosynchronous communication satellite in a science fiction story he wrote back in the 50s, I think. And a number of other technological advances have been first sort of described in his science fiction. So it's interesting to look at a book by these two guys writing about the idea of wormholes. And we know this is something that science is really, really interested in. So it says, okay, well, let's propose a fictional plot around this technological research where they find a way in a laboratory to open a wormhole, a microscopic, teeny tiny wormhole. But they figure out a way to open it. And they also figure out a way to identify where it's opening on the other end, because a wormhole is obviously two ends. The story progresses, and I won't spoil the story, but I'll just give you an idea of the sort of questions it poses for us. What they discover is that by opening a wormhole, even a microscopic one, they can position the other end of that wormhole wherever they want. So suddenly, humanity is in the possession of a technology that allows them to see or hear in any location on Earth whenever they want. So you want to know what's going on in the Oval Office? You can open up a little microscopic wormhole that's just big enough that you can pull light and sound through it and see and hear what's going on the other side. So suddenly, no one has any guarantee of any privacy. How does that change the way we view privacy? The story progresses. It starts wrestling with this. What does this mean for national security? If you can open up a microscopic wormhole anywhere and listen to anything and see anything. The story progresses, and they realize that the other end of the wormhole, where you open the exit, doesn't have to be in the same moment as the opening of the wormhole. So you can have a wormhole that you can look through here, and the other end opens, let's say, in Nazareth 2,000 years ago. So humanity is suddenly in possession of a technology that allows them to view any moment in history, past, present, or future. What kind of impact? I mean, those are massive questions, and I'm not saying this is the best book ever written. I'm saying it's hugely thought-provoking. I had so much fun reading that book because it sparked so many ideas and really got my brain thinking about it. And that's science fiction at its best. It's making us think. It's making us care about the choices we're going to face. So that's my argument for science fiction. Hug a robot. And remember that the genre, I know that it's not going to be for everybody, and I'm not going to recommend that you get into it if you're not into it, but I hope that you will see that there is a real value to it. It's not all pew, 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 pew. Science fiction is about thinking about where we're going as a species and as a civilization, and trying to wrestle with some of the choices we're going to face before we get there, so that we've done some thinking about it ahead of time. Thank you very much for listening.